Colorism costs us a lot, a whole lot. It can cost us intangible things like pride, esteem, confidence. It can cost us relationships. It can cost us solidarity. Colorism costs us unity. It costs us romantic options. It costs us peace of mind, self-expression, right? People feeling like they can't wear certain colors. But colorism also costs us money, okay? And most people, many people can be kind of patient with problems and issues until those issues start messing with their coins, okay? And so colorism is messing with our coins. And a lot of times the conversations people have focus so much on the beauty standards. And I understand that. I understand where that's coming from. This series has been about all of the other impacts that colorism has beyond just physical attractiveness or perceived beauty. And I think the economic disparity is one that people, once they start to see like, oh, this is actually a systemic issue. It's not just about bullying. It's not just about, oh, someone was mean to me on the playground or someone was mean to me in the hallway, right? But that there are consequences in terms of people's access to resources and people's ability to support themselves. And so today I'm talking dollars. Please let me know if I'm making sense. All right. Y'all know I love a good pun. If you are new to this series, I'm Dr. Sarah Webb, the founder of Colorism Healing, and I welcome you. And so these studies looked at wage gaps. The first one is amongst African Americans, and the second two are amongst Latinx workers and employees. So for the study that looked at African American wages and income, they found that the gap between white Americans and African Americans widened. The gap got wider as the skin tone of the employee got darker. And so when we talk about racial income inequality and we say, oh, you know, Black people aren't earning as much as white people in this country, that is not static across the entire race. It's really a gradient. It really is a spectrum. And so African Americans that had the lightest skin tones, there was virtually no gap between their income and the income of white Americans. And those with medium brown skin tones, those falling more towards the middle of the human skin tone spectrum, that's where we start to see the significant gap. And of course, those with the darkest skin tones had the widest gap. I'll also say at this point that if last week I talked about biases in hiring and colorism in hiring, so you might be able to correlate a lot of the hiring practices with these income and wage disparities. Now, looking just amongst African Americans, they found that there was as much as a 14% gap in income and wages, right? And on average, it was 12 to 14% difference between those with light skin and those with darker skin tones. Now, the second research study, again, these last two are looking at Latinx employees. So the one study looks at income, but also overall socioeconomic status. And so they said that not only did the lighter skinned Latinx employees have higher income, but their socioeconomic wealth in general was larger, right? So they might have also had more investments. They might have more property, more inheritances. And so just financially speaking, the Latinx employees that were part of the study had a better financial outcome. And then the third study, again, looking at Latinx individuals with mostly European ancestry versus those with indigenous or African ancestry. And so the gap that they found was about a 22% gap, right? Which is even higher than what we saw in the study for African Americans. So amongst Latinx employees, the gap between those with the lighter skin tones and those with darker, more indigenous features and skin tones was on average or up to as much as 22% gap, right? Now, I don't like to just throw out the research. I think the research is important because, again, people really think it's just bias that is on an individual basis. And when we think about colorism as a systemic issue, we do have to understand that it corresponds and correlates to all the inequalities and disparities and inequities that we associate and attribute to racism and racial disparities. We have to resolve color-based income inequality if we ever hope to solve racial income inequality, right? And I've been talking about how all of the efforts and the initiatives and the studies and the changes in policies and protocols to create greater racial equity are for naught. We're just running on a little hamster wheel, spinning our wheels in a rut if we're not acknowledging the impact that colorism plays in the equity equation, okay? Now, the second takeaway is that there could be many reasons for these disparities. Most of the existing research, current research, has been focused on proving that there is disparity, right? So trying to find out if there actually is differences in pay based on skin tone, right? And so that's really, really important work. Shout out to all of the researchers who have helped to move the needle on this conversation around colorism by giving us data, by giving us things, more concrete receipts that we can point to say, yes, this is a systemic issue. And so future research, I think what I would encourage is thinking about why that disparity exists, right? Why do these income disparities exist? And so my hypothesis, any academics or researchers listening or reading the article, I would love to see research similar to the research that we have around gender and income inequality based on sex or gender, right? And so, future studies might ask questions like, are lighter skinned people more likely to negotiate a salary in the same way that men are more likely to negotiate when they apply for jobs? Or do lighter skinned people ask for a higher starting salary off the bat in the same way that men are more likely to ask for a higher fee or a higher starting salary? And then also, is there bias in the negotiating process itself? So last week I talked about perceptions of competency, perceptions of professionalism, or perceptions of intelligence and how that impacted hiring. But even if you decide to hire somebody, your negative biases or stereotypes could also be impacting whether or not you accept or approve of their requested salary or their requested hourly rate, right? And then a third takeaway or insight I want to share is that if some people are getting paid less, that means some people are getting paid more. And so when I do this work and I see the resistance, I see the denial, I see the pushback, I see the apathy, I see people just wanting to ignore and dismiss this conversation, I have to acknowledge, in order to do this work, that some people are incentivized to sustain their relative benefit, right? To be complicit in the system is easier if you benefit from it, right? There are people who are harmed by systems that are also complicit in those systems, which we can talk about later. But definitely if you actually benefit from that system or that dynamic, then that incentivizes you to be complicit. And so to lighter skinned Black and brown people, BIPOC folks, you have to ask yourself, why do I ignore colorism? Why am I so defensive when colorism is brought up on the table? When again, if you look at the past 11 or 12 weeks that I've been talking about this, there are hundreds of research studies, books, articles, data sets that are showing the systemic advantage, the systemic power and privilege that you are given because of your skin tone, right? And so the only thing that I would say, because people have asked me before, why would lighter skinned people care to dismantle colorism if they benefit from it? And so I have always been of the mindset that any system that oppresses some of us is likely to oppress all of us, right? And so you're not safe in a system that oppresses anybody, because these systems ain't loyal, okay? These systems really ain't loyal. And then the fourth thing is, we must remember that due to factors like compounding interest, that the numbers I quoted from the research studies are actually going to get bigger and wider across the lifespan of these people's lives. So yeah, if you're new on the job market, you're fresh in a career field, you're going to start out at a higher salary. But when you start investing in your 401ks, you start taking your residual income and reinvesting it, or just having compound interest on it, and then you look at the compounding impact of Well, I have more money, which affords me greater access to things like cars or transportations or living in a neighborhood that's close to work or whatever. That then feeds back into your ability to earn more income, right? I feel like I think in like these giant webs, and I'm like, it has these ripple effects across in a person's entire life. And so, yes, we might say, oh, well, you know, a 10% wage gap. Like, what is that, right? By the time those people are at retirement, that is going to compound. Like, that gap is going to continue to widen and increase. Again, not to mention all of the other opportunities, resources you're able to accrue throughout your lifetime and throughout your career because you had a little more disposable income to begin with, right? And so the compounding impact of these gaps, I think, is also something that we must be aware of. If you are an employer, if you work for a company or a business, you know, request audits of wages and salaries based on skin tone. So just like you have data to see, are we paying, you know, people equitably based on their gender? Are we paying people equitably based on their race, right? We have to also start doing that analysis for skin tone. And then your affirmation for the week is, this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Just because someone else is winning doesn't mean I have to lose, right?